When talking about the first-person shooter genre, you know exactly what you're talking about after uttering those 3 words, because the genre itself has become the main one in the gaming industry that has developed its own golden standard. Everyone knows the second they pop in an FPS game that right trigger is shoot, X is reload, and left trigger will bring up the scope, and guns, movement controls, and enemy behavior is cut from the same cloth. This generalization has its own pros and cons that can be saved for another video, because this one is about Battlefield 2 Modern Combat, and specifically why its 2006-ness makes it go against the grain and manages to cobble together a control scheme that makes no bleeding sense. Just take a listen to this insanity, because while you get the usual right trigger shooting control, DICE decided that a good idea was that the reload should be mapped to B, scope is L3, jumping is the left button, gun switching is the right button as well as the grenades because the gun and grenade equip is the same slot, which is why I never use the damn things. The moronic controls of BF2 already make an unsavory shooter that much more uncomfortable to play. What the millennials don't know is that back in the day, most of your shooters had health bars, and they worked on a so-so basis depending on how many health packs you could find. And while Battlefield 2 has that old game trope, it also has no healing in the game because the game isn't a first-person shooter. It's a tactical shooter, which means that if one of your squad dies, you'll switch to a fellow NPC to finish the fight. And I would be all for an above-average tactical game if the AI of my platoon members hadn't just graduated from 2nd grade with a crying face in handwriting. These guys have the tactical sense of a sentient watermelon and will just usually run into the line of fire and then immediately die because they had their maneuvering skills programmed by a middle school kid in robotics class. If you are going to develop any game where tactics are involved, you have to put in the effort to allow players to create strategies instead of just watching an entire battalion run into a machine gun nest, leaving you as the last survivor to kill like 50 people. Even the so-so game Halo Wars kicks this game's strategizing to carpet-bombed bits. The most basic of positioning commands would have been plenty if DICE actually gave a shit, and even then if the game had that ability, I'm sure DICE would have never told the player that it existed in the first place, which is one of the game's bigger issues. Case in point, look at the interface for the game rewards. I have no fucking idea what any of this means, or what I can do with it. Are there weapon selections? Can I equip these to my character? What the fuck am I supposed to be doing with a GPS? Who the fuck knows? It's odd that for a game that wanted to go so far against the grain of the FPS that the World War II Call of Duty's carved out, that it also lacks any sort of tutorial or control menus. Even Call of Duty Advanced Warfare will pointlessly reiterate the controls again for players that have existed intact since Call of Duty 3. Thankfully, having no clues whatsoever is Battlefield 2's specialty in DICE's introduction to campaign storytelling. For better or worse, this was DICE's first campaign mode, since Battlefield was mainly a multiplayer game for its first 5 iterations or so, and it shows off that inexperience like a gold-painted spotlight. At least the developer finally answered my question: what would happen if N-Space ever made a console shooter? Because DICE and EA didn't even try. The premise this time around is that NATO and the Chinese military are occupying parts of Kazakhstan in order to liberate the country based on the ethical beliefs of either group you pick. It would have been a brilliant change to the normal shoot the bad man plot if DICE used any of this two sides of the same coin storytelling to an end, but nope. DICE gives you some loading screen paragraphs before missions, and that's it. Hell, DICE gave so little of a shit to write anything for this game that at the final mission, the game just says fuck it, flips over the table, and lets you pick which side to be on when the shit hits the fan, and the opposing leader is KIA. Then EA and DICE somehow threw more gas on the fire because after the Kazakh war ends, a person called Commander 31 appears from nowhere with access to nuclear weapons and claims of world domination. Yes, the game ends on a stupefyingly awful big-lipped alligator moment, and I say ends in the loosest of terms because the final mission in the game is the most awful part of the entire genre. Because every enemy can aim accurately from a mile away, where the only way to see them is to watch for tiny marks above their heads through a scope, and also the battlefield is covered in turrets, which the infinitely respawning combat robots will constantly use to pwn your squad's ass. This mission is so terrible that a soldier can be killed by a turret in 5 seconds from 600 yards. So you've got infinitely respawning soldiers, insta-kill turrets, and a 10-minute timer all in one mission. There were signs of this in previous missions, like the Counter Sniper Challenge as the 3rd mission in the frickin' game, basically being a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek, where you can barely see the other snipers, and there's 7 waves of them. Also, you have a squad of 3 only, so that's a giant world of fun. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat was a game that, contrary to its claim of modernism, tried to do everything possible not to be compared to regular first-person shooters by replacing a normal health-based FPS with a tactical FPS focusing on strategy elements the game doesn't have, yet allows the player to only watch as their units pour onto the battlefield and then immediately get struck down because they weren't shooting anything. The game revels in its poorly written, high-intensity missions where the enemy gets to kill all of your units from insane distances and then calls out the player for their stupidity when the entire platoon gets cut down. And even if you manage to beat everything the game can throw at you and the kitchen sink, there's no payoff when all you get is a nice card saying thanks for saving the world, badass.
No words will ever be adequate.
In short, the campaign mode is an inexperienced joke where nothing works in your favor and it's stuffed butt to gut with stupidly difficult bullshit that exists only to piss off players in their transparent attempt to try out strategy gameplay. Everyone should avoid this game's campaign completely and move on to the later entries where hopefully DICE would have gotten their sea legs. Which is exactly where we'll be next week when another Battlefield campaign will be tackled by yours truly. But until then, let's write up that final score and a heartfelt victory for gamers, because you all deserve it. Thanks for watching!